Good evening, everyone. I'm Vaishnavi Parate, the host of today's session. I, on behalf of the whole team of Just Corpus, welcome you all in today's session. Um, on From Victim to Suspect Gender Bias in Law Enforcement in South Asia. Before we delve into today's discussion, let me provide a brief introduction of Just Corpus and the eminent guest speaker of the day. Just Corpus is a body of legal professionals who have come together to bring various aspects and chains of law under a single umbrella. Just Corpus, an EdTech platform set up in 2020, has a wide reach of 600K clicks per month on an average basis on our website. The inspiration was derived from the ever-growing needs of for law students. Just Corpus has also incorporated an interdisciplinary journal and a multidisciplinary journal as its subsidiary name, as the Just Corpus Law Journal and the International Journal of Law Research, Education, and Social Sciences. Now, turning our attention to today's focal point, we are privileged to have Dr. Pooja Kapoor ma'am as our esteemed guest speaker. Dr. Pooja Kapoor is a distinguished academician currently serving as an associate professor at the School of Liberal Arts, Bennett University, Greater Noida. A trailblazer in her educational pursuits, Dr. Kapoor earned her BA honors in political science from Gargi College, Delhi University, where she secured the first rank. She further expanded her uh, academic horizon by completing her MA in political science from Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. Her scholarly contributions reached their pinnacle with a doctoral research focus on violation of human rights, case study of custodial violence in Delhi, culminating in the award of a Ph.D. from Jamia Millia Islamia University, New Delhi in 2004. Dr. Kapoor's commitment to academic excellence extends beyond her research achievements. Dr. Kapoor's intellectual contribution extends to the realm of published work, with several books credited to her name for various universities such as Jamia Millia Islamia University, Krishna Kanta, sorry for the pronunciation, Handiqui State Open University, and SRM University. Her prolific scholarship is further evidenced by numerous national and international journal publications, many of which are indexed in Scopus, showcasing her standing as a prominent figure in academia. Maybe I'm a little bit overwhelmed by the presence of ma'am. That's why I made few mistakes. But without further ado, I would like to hand over the floor to ma'am for her insights on the topic. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Vaishnavi, and nothing to be overwhelmed. You spoke very well, and I'm really honored to be here on this platform for Just Corpus for inviting me on this particular webinar that is from victim to gender biasness in law enforcement, especially in South Asia. As my work especially speaks for the South Asia and my research area is also with respect to South Asia. So I thought that why not today I talk about this gender biasness in the law enforcement, especially related to this particular region as such. And South Asia is one which most of us are quite familiar with it. So I'm sure I'm seeking forward that today's interaction will be more, interactive in its nature and maybe some key takeaways which the participants will, benefit from this webinar as such. So thank you once again, Vaishnavi. And I welcome all the participants over here who are listening to me so patiently. And I hope you raised a lot of questions. We can have a lot of discussions also, though we have a very short span of time. So I'll just talk about it, like what gender bias is, what is gender, how the law enforcement agencies should do about it, and taking about the comparative tool with the different countries, be it India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka. So all that is what I'll be doing today and presenting it before you all. Can I go to the next slide, please? Okay, so justice cannot be one side alone, but must be for both. Now, this proverb is being spoken by Eleanor Roosevelt. The law may be blind, but it is truly gender neutral. Now, we often say that, the police are the first line of justice. But let me ask you one thing. When a woman walks into a police station in India or Pakistan to file a complaint, do you really think that she feels like a victim seeking a justice or a suspect that is being interrogated? Why do women survivors of violence often hesitate to report the crimes? Is it the fear of perpetrator or a fear of system itself? Now, why do survivors from the marginalized communities like Dalits in India, Rohingya refugees in Bangladesh, or for that matter, the rural women in Nepal, they struggle even more being heard as such? And most importantly, can the law enforcement truly be impartial in societies where patriarchy defines morality, honor, and justice? So these questions, they are very rhetorical questions. They emerge from a very lived experiences of thousands of women across South Asia who find themselves trapped between the violence at home or on the street, the violence of disbelief inside the institutions as such. Supposedly, if I take the example of a Hathras case that is in Uttar Pradesh that had happened in 2020, a 19-year-old Dalit woman was being gang raped and fatally assaulted. And when her family tried to file a complaint, the police delayed registering the FIR, also dismissed the seriousness of the crime, and later, forcefully being cremated her body at night without her family's consent. Now, here are the victims was not only denied of the dignity of life, but also that of death too. Her family, instead of being treated with compassion, was treated with the nuances in it. And in Bangladesh, before the Supreme Court had, struck it down in 2018, the so-called two-finger test for the rape survivors was widely practiced. And this deeming procedure was less about justice and more about the questioning the morality of the victim. Many survivors walked away from the system altogether, unwilling in order to endure such a humiliation. And what about Nepal then? Nepal had also, numerous reports. The internet is flooded with those reports, shows that the women are facing the marital rape or domestic violence, which are often being, told by the police officers, no, this is a family matter. Try to reconcile with yourself. How? Justice is replaced with compromise, and survivors, they are left nothing but the vulnerability to the further abuse as such. In Sri Lanka, especially during the civil war, and I'm sure most of the participants over here will agree with me that most of the Tamil women who often been reported as a sexual violence by the security forces often found themselves being interrogated as if they are the militants and not the survivors. Their trauma was doubled, first as the victim of violence, then as a suspect of terrorism. Even in metropolitan, cities in India, this biasness we often see is often being persisted throughout. Um, 2012 Delhi gang rape case. Now, while it's spurred a massive legal reforms, the survivor's dignity was repeatedly being compromised as details of her character, her lifestyle, her whereabouts were questioned. Instead of asking why did these men commit such brutality, the system often asked why she was out at night. The institutional gaze is not one of empathy, but that is of suspicion. So, let me begin with this lecture. I invite you all to reflect on certain questions. What transforms a victim into a suspect in the eyes of law enforcement? If it is the flawed laws, institutional training, or is it the invisible weight of patriarchal structures of the society? So, the South Asia region that I'm talking about is inhabited by the diverse population of multiple religious, linguistic, ethnic, as well as the caste groups. They accompany this diversity is a history of marginalization as well as the discrimination of certain groups that has inevitably led to the exclusion, which had further exacerbated by the apathy of the state as well as the non-state actors through policies and practices. Caste discrimination in its various manifestation, it has been practiced almost all the countries of South Asian countries, bearing, of course, Bhutan and Maldives. Of course, they are not the ones. But besides this, even the identity crisis is very much there in these countries also. So apart, from the systemic discrimination, the Dalit women often faces, a lot of abuse, lot of discrimination, maybe because of the lower wages, the landlessness, the patriarchal structure, as well as the gender-based violences as such. In addition to this, discrimination is also based on the basis of ethnicity, for that matter, in many South Asian countries. Adivasis in India, Tamil or Madhisi community in Nepal, indigenous tribes that has been based in the Chittagong hill tracts of Bangladesh, and various persons of Tamil community in Sri Lanka. They are all being socially excluded based on their ethnicity as such. So women and girls, from the minority religious communities within a particular country, they do face discrimination based on that of religion too. Can we go to the next, please? Now, coming over here, we see about the conceptual groundwork that I have, talked about over here, that is defining gender. Now, most of the times in academic discourse, gender is often being distinguished from that of sex. While sex refers to the biological attributes, what we say is chromosomes, the autonomy, the reproductive organs, and all, that is how we define it. Gender is basically a social construct, and it defines about the roles, the behavior, the expectations, the identities that is being assigned, and that is how we know we perceive the biological differences as such. Now, Anne Oakley, one of the writers of the book that is Sex, Gender, and Society, in 1972 had specifically mentioned about it, and she's one of the sociologists who differentiates sex from gender, arguing that what society expects from men and women is shaped not by the biology, but it is shaped by the culture as such. On the other hand, there's yet another sociologist, that is Judith Butler, who had also, written in Gender Trouble, further advanced the idea that gender is basically performative in its nature. It is enacted through repeated social behaviors, norms, rather than it's being innate as such. So now we see Key and Ka, movies and all also, where we see that the gender roles are, completely being changing. Earlier, we used to see that it is the women who has household activity work, and the men are going to do the, and they are the bread earners or the breadwinners. But now the roles are completely changing. And as a result, in our academic literature, gender is not static at all, but it is quite fluid, it is quite relational, and it is very context specific in its nature. So, giving an example from the social context, we can say workplace. Now, in the workplace, we definitely see a lot of inequalities. So, women in South Asia, they are often underrepresented, in the formal employment. Gender norms push them into informal, unpaid care workers, especially in the conservative regions like that of Pakistan or that of Afghanistan. Girls are often being discouraged from attending schools, reflecting the gendered expectations of their domestic roles. Police skepticism towards the rape survivors in India is also one of the example of how gender stereotyping, putting a character or labeling the women as such also shapes their institutional behavior. Bollywood films, how can we forget that? They often portray, women as a sacrificial mothers or a very romantic interest, reinforcing the what we say as gendered stereotyping rather than challenging them altogether. So, looking at these examples, so we can definitely say that the gender bias in law enforcement often refer to the discriminatory practices. It refers to stereotyping. It definitely refers to the structural inequalities that is totally being deeply embedded in policing, be it the investigating processes, judiciary, or under the disadvantaged sections of the women, transgender, or LGBTQ plus individuals too. So it manifests various multiple forms. How we can say about it, the reluctance to register FIR. Now, first information, reports, most of the police stations and the officers they don't even register about it. Hostile questioning of the survivors, again, reliance on the character assessment rather than going by the facts or the systematic barriers in pursuing the justice. One of the United Nations Special Rapporteur report on women violence against women, they had observed that criminal justice system across the world, it is not about the South Asian only, but across the world, they often, engage themselves in secondary victimization, where, the survivors of violence, they suffer additional harm as such from very insensitive as well as the biased institutional responses. And why is it so? According to me, it is maybe because of deeply patriarchal societies that we have that shape the nature of the behavior, institutional behavior, as well as the gender biasness in the law enforcement as such. Can we go to the next slide, please? Okay. Now, coming over here, if you see, there's this theoretical framework being given over here. Now, when I talk about the theoretical framework, what exactly I mean about theoretical framework is that which theories I'll be pursuing about it in order to understand this particular topic. Now, when we talk about in the law jurisprudence, we have what we call it as a legal positivism versus feminist jurisprudence. Now, of course, due to the paucity of time, I cannot go into the details of the theory, but the basic crux, I'll tell you why I have taken these theories as such. Because legal positivist thinkers like H.L.A. Hart, he argues that law is a system of rules, independent of that of morality. Yet, feminist legal thinkers, they say about it that Catherine McKinnon and Carol Smart, they contest and emphasize that law is not neutral in its nature. It is constructed in a way that reflects and reinforces the patriarchal power. In South Asian context, if I talk about it, while laws in India, such as India's Criminal Law Amendment Act of 2013, it had definitely expanded the definitions of sexual violence. Their implementation often remains trapped in the gender stereotypes by law enforcement officials who act as interpreters of law. And in the second theory, where I talk about the critical legal studies as such, now this is also one of the most dominant theory in the social groups, where the patriarchal societies, that means the laws are applied in a way which is being upheld by the male dominance. Okay, so police questioning the focus on women's character rather than the crime definitely illustrates how enforcement is shaped less by the statutes but more about the entrenched gender norms as such. That's why I took the second theory. The third theory is very interesting. That is your sociological theories of law. And it is being given by Emily Durkheim and talks about the functionalist perspective. Sees the law as a reflection of collective conscience. In a patriarchal society, the collective conscience, they often place women's chastity as well as family honors above their rights as individuals. Explaining why honor killings are often being underreported or trivialized. And we all know that honor killing is being one time, the what do you say, was very much been prevalent in that of the northern India. And Max Weber's theory of rational legal authority. Now, that also suggests that law enforcement should function on a rational, impartial manner. But, however, do we really think that the South Asia Weber's model is subservient to that of the traditional structures? I definitely do, such as Khap Panchayats, in India, or we call it as Jirags in Pakistan, that shapes the police attitude and encourage the reconciliations over the justice. So these theories are quite important and very interesting about it when we take up such, sensitive topics as such, and understand that why such societies are not able to enforce the justice in a fair and rational manner as such. Next slide, please. Now, coming to the manifestation of the gender biasness in South Asian law enforcement. Now, when we talk about such biasness, common manifestation of bias, if I talk about in South Asia, is the reluctance of the police to register the complaint with respect to, maybe it is because of sexual harassment, it can be of assault, it can be of rape, it can be of domestic violence, it can be of theft, anything, now, survivors, they are often, pressurized into compromise. They are discouraged to pursue the cases, especially when we are talking about the marital rape. Now, marital rape is quite sensitive in its nature. Most of the women, and it has been regarded as considered as one of the most criminal offense, with over 104 countries across the world. In the South Asian region, only I think Bhutan and Nepal are the only ones that recognize this as a criminal offense in all circumstances, despite its alarming prevalence as such. But moreover, in India, if we talk about it, during registration, the police officers, they stamp the penal codes to cases that signals probably the laws are being violated. So, violence against women penal codes, if I talk about it, it includes lot of section like section 326A, which talks about acid throwing, and till 2011 till 2013, if I'm not wrong, acid attack was not been regarded as one of the criminal offense. But now it is definitely been regarded as one of the criminal offense, and it is under section 326A as such. Then comes section 498A, which talks about the dowry harassment. Section 376, which talks about the rape. And this goes and goes on. The list is quite vast in its nature. Section 154 of the Code of Criminal Procedure Code of 1973, that also mandate that every information related to the cognizable offense, it must be recorded in the police station in writing. Yet, in practice, do we really see this thing coming up? There are n number of cases for the same. The most famous case that I can think about is the Lalita Kumari versus Government of Uttar Pradesh in 2014. Now, if you see about this case, the Supreme Court had ruled that the police officers are duty bound to register the FIRs without the preliminary inquiry in the cognizable cases, including the sexual offense. So this judgment definitely, highlighted the widespread reluctance of police to take the women cases quite seriously. Pakistan, again, if I talk about it, it talks about like under section 154 of the Code of Criminal Procedure, that was in 1898 when we had that Pakistan. The police, are similarly required to record the FIRs. However, women are frequently being reported that the police are not putting out the complaints. They are being harassing. There are a lot of allegations about it. And as a result, they are often insisting on mediation within the families. One of the famous case of Pakistan is that of the Muktaran Mai case, that is in 2002, where the tribal panchayat, they had ordered a gang rape as a retribution when her brother was wrongly accused of having an affair with a woman of a rival gang. So definitely it exposed not just the social bias, but the initial, the institution is not able to file the complaint altogether. It was only after media and lot of international pressures that had gone about it that they had pursued them, that under section 376 of the Pakistan Penal Code, which talks about the rape provisions, they should register it. And as a result, lot of movement had happened about it, which I'll be talking about in a little while. So these are certain cases jahan pe we see about the manifestations as such. Bangladesh, again, several reports had come over that they are not able to register the complaint under their Women and Children Repression Prevention Act of 2000, especially when the perpetrators, they have a political patronages as such. The next comes to your evidentiary bias and the two finger test. Now, when I talk about, I like to tell you over here what this two finger test is. It basically involves the examination of a woman's vagina to check if she has been habited to have a sexual intercourse. That is what two finger test is. Law enforcement bias has also appeared, the evidence that this is how they gathered and interpreted it. Now, this two finger test in rape cases is being used in South Asia until recently, where it had reflected the patriarchal notions of chastity as well as morality rather than that of legality. Now, in India specifically, in one of the cases, that is State of Punjab versus Gurmeet Singh case, that had happened in the year 1996, where the Supreme Court, they had recognized that the rape victim definitely faces the hostile police questioning and skepticism. Another one of the important cases was the Lilu and Rajesh versus State of Haryana that had come in the year 2013. Over here, again, the court had banned this two finger test, ruling out that it is violating the dignity of a woman, and of course in also infringes article 21 of the Indian constitution as such. And section 375 of again IPC was also amended in the year 2013, post Nirbhaya case. This was in order to broaden the definition of rape and reduce the evidentiary hurdles as such. Now this is with respect to India. Coming to another country, that's Nepal. When we talk about it, despite various legal reforms, including the Mulki Criminal Code of 2017, which is also being called as the National Penal Criminal Code 2074, that had happened in 2017. The reports also shows that the police are still relying on victims' character and sexual history in order to assess the credibility of perpetuating the crime. So, this is what exactly we are living in this century, where we need the evidences, and this is how we are gathering the evidences as such. And section 364 in Sri Lanka, which talks about the penal code had criminalizes the rape, but court proceedings often allow the cross examination on a survivor's sexual past, reflecting the institutional prejudices as such. And when we talk about the domestic violence in the marital basis as such, of course, in the patriarchal societies, law enforcement often treats domestic violence as a private matter. It is not to be coming into the public as such. And most of the time, if we see about our media also, we have one of the ad campaign that had come up with Ghenti Bajao. Until unless you are ringing a doorbell and you see if the violence has been there, then it is all our responsibility to make those women, be strengthworthy and get them out of their hell as such. Now, in the India, if we talk about the Protection of Women from Domestic Violence Act, that is of 2005, it definitely recognizes the physical, emotional, sexual, economic abuse. Yet in practice, women reports that police refuses to register the cases under, section 498A of IPC, that is cruelty by husbands on their relatives, citing the misuse of the law. And no doubt, some of them, it's definitely been misused also. And I totally agree about that. But how to come about that which law has been misused and which is not to be misused? Especially if I talk about Anesh Kumar versus State of Bihar case, 2014, the Supreme Court had, restricted the automatic arrest under Section 498A again to prevent the misuse. But this is also let a police to, trivialize the genuine complaints again. If I talk about Pakistan, domestic violence law definitely, it vary from province to province in Pakistan. Punjab Protection of Women's Violence Act is there in 2016, and let me tell you, Punjab in India also we have, and one district we also have in Pakistan, that is Punjab, that we say. Okay, so don't confuse with India's this Violence Act. It is the Punjab that is in Pakistan itself, but enforcement is quite weak. Police often, encourage reconciliation rather than that of prosecution. And in Bangladesh, if I talk about it, then again, the Domestic Violence Prevention and Protection Act of 2010 also provide various civil remedies, yet lack of police training as well as societal, biasness limit its, effectiveness altogether. Custodial violence and gender vulnerability is yet very important again because women are quite vulnerable in their nature. Especially in India, we talk about Sheila Barse versus State of Maharashtra. If I talk about it in 1983, where the Supreme Court had mandated, separate lockups for women and access to that of a legal aid. Yet custodial sexual violence still persists and often, charged under section 376(2) of IPC. Again, Nepal, if I talk about it, the women are being detained for sex work or for abortion related offenses. They also face the disappropriate, custodial abuse that definitely reflect both gender as well as the class biasness. In Sri Lanka, again, under the Convention of I think it is Convention Against Torture Act of 1994, where custodial violence is definitely being criminalized, but enforcement again it's quite weak in its nature. And LGBTQ plus and the gender non-conforming persons, law enforcement in South Asia, no doubt about it, often discriminates among these communities as such. Under India, we had the section 377 of IPC that definitely criminalizes the homosexuality, and it was struck down in Navtej Singh Johar versus Union of India in 2018. Transgender persons, they continue to face the harassments by the police. The Transgender Persons Act of 2019 definitely prohibits this discrimination, but again, they have been a constant target as such. In Pakistan, again, if we talk about it, the Transgender Persons Protection of Rights Act of 2018 is quite progressive, but again, transgender individual faces the routine harassment by that of the police violence as such. Again, Bangladesh, if I say about it, the Hijra community, they have been recognized as the third gender since 2013, but most often police put raids, they are being booked in the police stations. So across we see that the gender biasness is the norm of the day altogether. And because of this, case laws, we have the Nirbhaya judgment from that to that of Mukta Mai, cases on that of Pakistan. They often really reveals about it that how the court attempts to push this law enforcement towards that of gender sensitivity. Yet the police culture, they often undermines the progress altogether. And for a meaningful reform, one must go beyond the statutes of the law, and they should include what we call it as a gender sensitization training that can be done. Accountability mechanisms can be held about it, and survivor centered procedures, which I'll be talking in a short while. And then we have what we call it as a judicial and procedural delays. Yes, judicial and procedural delays are yet another important aspect about it that I have seen about in South Asians law enforcement agencies. The justice system is shaped by the patriarchal attitudes. They often treats the gender, based crimes that are less urgent compared to the property or state-centric offenses as such. As a result, the survivors of the sexual violence or that of a domestic abuse experiences long trials. In India, especially in 2012, we have the Nirbhaya gang rape case that has spurred a widespread reform. No doubt, fast track courts have been put up, but yet, we see about it that the judgment had come quite late about it. In Pakistan, also, we see that the criminal laws, rape acts, has been there in 2016. They had also introduced the provisions of speedy trials and in camera proceedings. However, the survivors still report that the delays are very much been there, especially during in the rural areas. In Bangladesh, Women and Child Representation Prevention Act is there, which provides a trial within that of 180 days. But however, due to the case drags for all various long periods, due to the judicial backlog, the maybe because of the corruption or the financial duress, whatsoever the reasons are, they survivors are and the victims, they are the ones who are facing the adversities of the judicial systems as such. Now, if I'd say about it, let me pose one question to you after giving this lecture. Uh, why do you think that the biasness persist, or why these biasness towards the gender is so relevant in the South Asian societies? Any idea about it? Or if you can give it me in something in writing in the chat box. If anyone would like to share their comments. Okay. What I really feel is that why does this biasness persist is maybe this is because of the cultural patriarchy, the law relating, societal norms where women are seen as the custodians of honor. So this translates into that of a police attitudes as such. The second reason can be that of an institutional deficits, lack of gender sensitization. That can be one of them. The intersectional discrimination. So, women from the marginalized groups, maybe the Dalits in India, the Rohingyas and refugees in Bangladesh, or the Tamilians in that of Sri Lanka, they face the compound biasness as such. And of course, lastly, we can say about the weak accountability. Now, the mechanism, the discipline of the police misconduct or the minimal, biasness, that also remains unchecked altogether. Can I go to the next slide, please? Now, over here, it is one of the most interesting thing that I had found over a period of study is the structural as well as what we call it as an institutional biasness. Now, when we talk about the structures, now structures, as I was talking earlier also, over here, the structures that I mean in the society is the caste structure, the patriarchal structure, the heteronormative value structures. These are the ones that frames the law enforcements altogether. Even, when we see progressive laws are enacted, their implementation is definitely being mediated by the police attitudes, the legal procedures, the intersecting of the social hierarchies. They often result in the re-victimization rather than that of a justice. Now, when we talk about the police training and attitude, see, the police alone is not responsible for giving us the justice as such. The whole structure, the police are the ones, the lawmakers are the ones, the judiciary is the one. So these are the ones which has to see about it and has to come about it and bring about a lot of what do you say, the reforms in the system, so that they are the ones which can make the victims more secure in their nature. Police officers, they often serve as the first point of contact for the survivors for gender based violence. And that's quite true. We always look up to the police for that matter. The institutional culture of policing in South Asia It is marked by the hierarchical masculinity as well as the lack of gender sensitization. So, victims, they routinely encounter the disbeliefs, harassments, outright refusal of seeking to file the complaints as such. And for that, I have already given the example, the landmark judgment of Lalita Kumar. I have talked about it. And in Pakistan, I had also talked about the code of the criminal procedure, so I'm not going into detail. But very interestingly, when I was searching about this topic and everything, I came across in a one interesting case, that is that of a Dr. Shazia case, a physician who was working in Pakistan Petroleum Limited hospital, and in Baluchistan she was being raped at gunpoint by the security officers, state-run company. Just imagine that. And this case was being highlighted so much. The accused was a military officer, he was never being convicted, and Dr. Shazia at last had to leave the Pakistan due to that of harassment as well as intimidation or that of threats for that matter. These are the case studies which are quite available about it in the Amnesty International journals, as well as the Amnesty International had reported time and again about these case studies. In Bangladesh, also, we see about it that there is hardly any systematic training or the accountability of the survivor is being given. Coming to the legal procedures, when we talk about it, of course, medical examination is one of the most crucial agenda and the most important point. In India, we have Section 164A of Indian Criminal Procedure Code, which requires the prompt medical examination of the survivor within 24 hours, as such, if it's a rape survivor. So, of course, in practice, delays are quite common, particularly in the rural areas where the survivors may have to travel a long distance altogether to file one report as such. Such delays, definitely weaken the forensic evidences, and it also undermines the prosecution as such. Coming to the two finger test that I had already talked about it, but one of the case that I had talked about is about Lilu and Rajesh versus State of Haryana. The second case that I'd like to bring forward is the state of Jharkhand versus the Shalendra Kumar case of 2022, which was a benchmark for the Supreme Court, where it has stated that whether a woman is habituated to sexual intercourse or habitual to sexual intercourse is irrelevant altogether for the purpose of determining whether the elements that are mentioned in section 375 rape of IPC are present in a particular case or not. So Supreme Court in this case, had reiterated the ban on the two finger testing, which was quite an achievement altogether. Humiliating cross examination. Again, the survivors are often, being questioned about their sexual history, their morality, their clothing, and Section 146 of the Indian Evidence Act of 1872, as amended, prohibits such questioning altogether. Especially in a state of Punjab versus Gurmeet Singh, our Supreme Court had cautioned the court as such about these hostile cross examination relating to the rape altogether. In Pakistan, again, we talk about they had also introduced the DNA testing and in camera proceedings. Yet, court frequently demanded that they should have, corroborations or eyewitnesses should be there if there's any sexual assaults. And still, the victim is still a secondary victimization story still being prevalent. So, looking into all three, we have another lens to look about it, and that is intersectionality. Now, when we talk about intersectionality over here, I would like to refer about the marginalized sections of the society. Now, when we talk about marginalized section of society, Hathras case, as I was talking about a couple of minutes back in 2020, that what had happened. Then we have the Scheduled Caste as well as Scheduled Tribe Prevention Act 1989. Again, these are the cases that revealed the systemic collision between the caste hierarchies as well as the police institutions as such. And when we talk about the judicial recognition, especially in state of Karnataka versus Krishnappa, the Supreme Court, they not only I'll say noted the crimes against the Dalit women, but they represent the incidents that shows that the police bias often prevent the protection from being realized as such. So all these cases are talking about the biasness altogether. Then Bangladesh, I had already talked about the Chittagong Hill Tract and double discriminations the Bengali groups as well as the Rohingya groups has to face about it. The transgender people again are the ones that had faced time and again, despite their self-identification, despite their vulnerabilities, they had that of a police violence altogether. And in Bangladesh, of course, although the Hijras recognized as the third genders in the 2030, the transgender communities altogether, and as such, again, these terminologies we cannot use, but these terminologies are often being used, and they are quite derogatory terminologies altogether. And as such, besides this, during the colonial era, we have what we called as the Vagrancy Act of 1943, which reflect about the dejuncture between the progressive recognition and the repressive institutional practices altogether. Can we go to the next slide, please? Now, when we see about the counter examples about it, we have lot of things had happened over a period of time, and as such, we see that the government is doing lot of things also um, to improve the survivor-centric policing, enhance the evidentiary procedures, and so on. In India, what steps we have taken so far is the survivor-centric support mechanism that we talk about, and with the establishment of one-stop center, under the Ministry of Women and Child Development. These centers are the ones which are quite crucial. They provide the integrated services such as that of counseling, psychological counseling, medical aid, temporary shelter to the survivors who are the victims of sexual or that of a domestic assault. So this one-stop centers have been there in the urban areas, no doubt about it, still needs to drop down to that of a rural women as such. Then in Sri Lanka, we have women and child desk policing. This is yet another important, we can say where they had specialized institutional mechanisms. These help desks are the ones that functions about the police stations. They do the staff and training of the police station. They often have the female officers who are instructed in order to handle the cases with a lot of sensitivity as well as confidentiality as such. And in Bangladesh, again, we had what we call it as a technological reforms in evidence collection. And as such, the institutionalization have what we say is a DNA testing. Now, DNA testing is very important about it, and outdated methods of discriminatory practices like that of two-finger testing should be completely banned altogether. In Nepal also, we see about it that the Nepal's constitution of 2015 had also explicitly guaranteed the gender equality, be it under Article 18, which prohibits discrimination on the basis of sex, be it Article 338 for that matter, where they affirm the women's right with special measure against violence. So these Nepal police also had established what we call it as women and children service centers, where in the district as well as sub districts also. So these are some of the where we can say that the reforms are definitely been happening about it in the South Asia. But two reforms that I'll definitely come across is one of institutional innovations like special help desks, help centers, forensic reforms. These are the ones. And second that I can talk about is the constitutional and judicial intervention. That also plays a very catalyst role altogether. So in Bangladesh, as I told you, the DNA evidences. Nepal, we have the constitutional guarantee. India, we have the social support, the welfare policy measures that has been happening time and again. Can we go to the next slide, please? Now, over here, we talk about the recommendations and what can be the path ahead for all of us. Now, quickly, if I talk about it, it's about the gender sensitization training. The police, the prosecutors, the judge, they should be fully equipped with the knowledge of they should have those skills to handle the very gender-based case sensitively. In these cases, that's understanding the trauma that a person must be experiences as a survivor. So the practical modules, they can study about the mock investigations, the role plays, the case study analysis. All this can be a part of the police training altogether. Then we can also think about the victim centric procedures, that is fast track courts. Of course, it can expedite the trials of sexual assault or maybe of domestic violence survivors and so on. Then community policing model. Now this is very important, because community policing, where we can have the marginalized women's also in the police as such, where they can generate a lot of trust, the safety, and encourage in order to report the crimes as such. So that is yet another. NGOs and civil society. So these are the communities that we are basically talking about, to foster a collaboration with the law enforcement agencies and work together to have a better attainment of the survivor victims. And legal literacy, yes, legal literacy is very much important. It is a program can conducted through workshops, through mobile legal aid clinic. Community outreach can empower the women and can seek the redressals as such. And accountability mechanism, that is very important. Independent review boards, if there's any police misconduct or anything, then of course there should be these rewards, and the feedbacks should be given in the system as such, so that they can improvise and make a better society altogether. So next slide please. Coming to the winding up of our discussion, so at the heart of this discussion lies a very pressing question: when a woman report a crime, will she be heard as a victim or judged as a suspect? Across South Asia, this, answer remains troubling, ambiguous. Cases from Hathras to Muktanai, all these women who approach law enforcement for protection and justice, they are often being subjected to skepticism, intrusive interrogation, victim blaming, while the perpetrators of the crime, they benefit from the systemic inertia and complicity. As Michelle Obama had aptly said, the measure of any society is how it treats its women and girls. This measure definitely extends beyond the social attitudes into the very mechanism of justice. So, law enforcement agencies are not merely neutral instrument, but they embody the state's commitment to uphold the rights as well as safeguard its citizens altogether. So, addressing this issue requires more than the procedural reforms. It demands the recalibration of the social contact itself. Victim centric practices, gender sensitization programs, training, legal literacy are some of the things, or the accountability mechanism are the things where we can talk about the gender justice altogether. Ultimately, gender bias, in law enforcement is not a peripheral problem. It reflects deeper societal values as well as the institutional priorities. Each instances, where a woman is treated as a suspect rather than a survival, signals a failure to the state honor its obligation altogether. So as a result, only, when we stands for the gender equity, transform the system from one to that of empowering the women's, only then we can say or claim to measure up the standards it aspires to hold. So with this, I wind up my lecture, and thank you all for listening to me so patiently. Thank you once again, and good evening.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for sharing your valuable insights. It's really wonderful. Now, I invite all participants to engage in the question and answer round, where you are free to ask questions to Pooja, ma'am, and I guess I'll read them for you. So, ma'am, there are questions. We'll take up three questions, okay?
Please do.
So,
I'm waiting for all the questions.
So, ma'am, the first question is how can we prevent gender bias
Okay.
and vis-a-vis domestic violence laws in India?
To tell you very frankly, gender bias can be, it can be cured or it can be treated very seriously if the youth of today treated each and every one as equal, if not equal, but give the parameter of equity as such. Now, when I talk about equity, it doesn't mean ki, okay, I am a man, she is a woman, she has to hold the house together. I have to be a bread earner or breadwinner. In today's generation, especially in the urban societies where both men and women are working together, one cannot say that I am above you or I am below you. That doesn't happen. And this is not how it's going to work. In future societies where everyone is at par with one another and where we are having a nuclear families all together, you have to take the stand for your own right. No one is going to help you out. If you see there's a domestic violence going on, or if there's a domestic violence in your own household with your own relatives, with your own friends, or with your own, company or something, you need to take the stand and make the other person aware about the laws that has been prevalent in India. Vaishnavi, most interestingly, our laws are very much there. But why we call them as a weak laws? Because we citizens itself doesn't want to respond to the violence. We take that thing for granted. It has been embedded in our, society as well as embedded in our culture altogether. कि ठीक है एक थप्पड़ ही तो मारा, कौन सी बड़ी बात हो गई? No, no way. This is not to be treated right. अगर वही थप्पड़ other spouse ने मारा हो, will it be treated as right? No, you won't take it. So how can she take it, right? It's not about the thappar or the slapping. This is about the action, the attitude, the intention behind it. And that is what, we have to stop about it. Until unless we are not understanding, we are not empowering ourselves, we are not getting that education, we are not knowing the laws and regulations about it. Sorry to say, this poor state will continue to be there throughout the centuries also. Okay.
Very powerful answer, ma'am, and very correctly pointed out that एक ही थप्पड़ तो था, लेकिन that's the starting point where we should raise our voice.
Yes.
One more question is there. So, in your experience, which sectors or professions show the strongest pattern of gender bias and why?
Okay. When we talk about the gender bias, we see a lot of sectors for that matter. Earlier, we used to talk about Bollywood, where, in the cinematic or in the media industry, or for that matter, journalism, we see that the women are paid much less than what the men are being paid for. But now the stories are also changing. But that we are seeing in current century, that the stories are changing, not in the past. That had happened. So Bollywood media, I'll say journalism is one sector, definitely. In the academic sector, again, education, when we talk about it, we see that there are very less women vice chancellors rather than, the men. Men are more, women are quite few. Maybe you can count it on your fingers. Maybe 10, maybe 15, not more than that, believe me. So why this biasness has been there? And why? Because they are not capable enough, or because they are not getting those opportunities. uh, in this we have what we call it as a honeybee syndrome, and most queen bee syndrome we talk about it. That is, queen is there, and she's the one who is making other people also work together. There's a whole networking that has been going on. If a woman is working for 8 hours, do you really think that she can do her networking after 8 hours, beyond 8 hours? It's not possible. And in today's world, everything goes via through your networking only. So where does she has that time? She has to cook dinner. She has to see her children. This is what has been expected. That is what gender roles we have been having it. Very performative roles we are talking about, isn't it? So where does she have a time to perform all other beyond her capability, her capacity that she can look into it? That is, can we can say one of the reason that why women are not stepping on the ladders about it, rather than men are doing it in a much finer manner so much. So academic is yet another, media, I have already told you about it. And of course, I'm sure in the administration also, the bureaucracy, though I have not been into those circles, but I'm sure they must be also facing some biasness or the other, or maybe in the what we say as the administration altogether. So biasness, we always see it's very much there, because आप उनके framework देख लीजिए ना, आप देखिए कि उनका किसी का भी framework में how many women are there and how many men are there. So you will see कि biasness कहाँ पे हो रही है. ये जरूरी नहीं है कि यही एक पैरामीटर होना चाहिए. दिस इज नॉट व्हाट आई एम सेइंग कि दिस इज ओनली शुड बी द पैरामीटर, बट ओवरऑल आपको एक surface level picture you can very well imagine. Okay.
Very well said, ma'am. And the last question from the audience is, why do many male victims are considered as suspects?
Male victims, very nicely asked. Whosoever had given this question, it's awesome. Why is it so? Because this is what is being embedded in our processing system. And sorry to all the male friends over here, nothing against you people, but that is what the data basically talks about it, that most of the, what we say, crimes that had happened, it is being perpetuated by the male people only. Now, in recent times, we also see that there are various female, who are perpetuating that crime also. But most of it, maybe the ratio had dropped down to 70s to 30, but 70 still we see about it. It is the males who are doing that, atrocities that they have committed on the female as such. So going beyond that data, we are talking about it. It is not our, individual opinion as such. It is about the data that we procure from either from the National Human Rights Commission reports, if we see about it, NHRC reports, or the reports that is being said by the Amnesty International. So these are the reports when they do the survey or they conduct the survey. That is how these reports show about it, that, these are the things that we have a male victims that is, perpetuating the crime altogether. So nothing against the male friends, please. If not each and every male must be committing it. And I'm sure कईयों के साथ तो domestic violence भी हुआ होगा, जिनके लिए अभी laws भी आने जरूरी हैं, which I really believe कि होना भी चाहिए, क्योंकि जब हम equity की बात करते हैं तो definitely we also stand for our male friends also कि उनको भी उतना ही support मिलना चाहिए अगर हम female को भी दे रहे हैं, right? So that is one thing. Yeah.
So basically it's for both ways, ma'am, कि mindset अगर change होना है तो दोनों के लिए होना चाहिए.
Yes, that it should be, and law, it should be neutral for that matter, and of course justice तो मिलना ही चाहिए. That's true.
Exactly, ma'am. In closing, we extend our heartfelt gratitude to Pooja, ma'am, for accepting our invitation and delivering such an informative session. We trust that the audience found it both interesting and knowledgeable. Thank you once again, ma'am, and we eagerly anticipate the opportunity to host you again. And I am personally grateful to Just Corpus for making me the host of today's session, because I learned a lot from you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Vaishnavi, and thank you to all my lovely participants. Thank you so much, and looking forward for our next session. Take care. Good evening.